Welcome back to the third of the presentations on presiding at the Eucharist for our wonderful class of 2019 deacons. We've heard from Alex and from David, and now I'm really pleased to say that the Reverend Kate Moore, who is on the staff of Chelmsford Cathedral, as well as being the head teacher of the church school in Birch, is going to speak to us. So Kate, over to you.
Hi everybody. I hope you got Andy's email with just a couple of sheets of paper from me, because there's a couple of texts that I just want to refer to. And my plan is really just to have maybe 3 short conversations, and if we don't get past the first one, that's fine. If we run out of time, that's fine. So I've just told you at the top a little bit about myself. So I've been ordained, I think, 10 years last Saturday. If anybody asks me to fill in a form about my churchmanship, I put kind of liberal Catholic, but I'm not sure I understand what either of those words mean, but it's the closest description I can make of myself. I had a wonderful time as a curate in All Saints Springfield Green, and was quite surprised to find myself as an associate priest at Chelmsford Cathedral, mainly to do with Bishop John Raw really not knowing what else to do with me. If you're a staff supporting minister, your time is limited. And it's been a really, really good 7 years. I combined it with being a head teacher and spending a little bit of time with St Mellitus College on a Thursday night, which I presume some of you are very familiar with. Yeah. So the first thing that I wanted to just talk about was my very earliest experience of the Eucharist. So I did not come from a church family. Church wasn't mentioned. We didn't go to church. We did Easter and Christmas like everybody else, but it had no particular significance. But what I was really attracted to was words and music as a child. So I heard words like, even the hairs on your head are counted. And I heard lots of words about being loved, but I didn't understand the context of those words until, and you would imagine that somebody would kind of fit that picture together maybe at school, but I went to 8 different schools and nothing made any sense whatsoever. Until my final school, aged I think 15, I ended up at one of the Woodard boarding schools, where if you're a musician, you're automatically a chorister, whether you can sing or not. And I began to spend day after day singing some of these words and listening to readings in the school chapel. And it just began to soak into my system what some of this was about. But it was the Eucharist on a Sunday morning that for me was just, if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would now be a priest. It was important as that at an early stage, because I kept hearing this invitation. I kept hearing something about a merciful Lord who was to be trusted. And to me, it seemed like week by week, it was an invitation. But I was at the kind of school where everybody had been confirmed the year before. And I really stood out like a sore thumb as a chorister, because everybody went up to receive communion except me. But I kept hearing these words of invitation. And I've just given for you the text here. So this is a text that was used every Sunday at that point. So if I just read it to you, it said, "We do not presume to come to thy table, O merciful Lord, trusting in our own righteousness, but in your manifold and great mercies." And I just kept hearing this and knowing that it applied to me, that I was part of this invitation. And in a moment of rare bravery, I approached the school chaplain and said, I really feel a call to this table. What needs to happen? And he was probably the world's most useless school chaplain, completely embarrassed by being approached by a teenage girl wanting to explore faith. He really was appalling. The first time he asked to speak to me, I think I waited outside his study for at least an hour because he completely forgot that he'd asked to see me. But I eventually got confirmed at school, confirmed by the Bishop of Selby up in Yorkshire. And then my first communion was then back in the school chapel the following day. And for me, the Eucharist is absolutely central to my faith as a Christian. Luckily, I did survive a completely rubbish school chaplain who realised the night before my confirmation that he needed to baptise me first. And the penny dropped for him that I hadn't been baptised as a child. So I had this wonderful baptism with all my friends in the school chapel, and then a minibus to some big church in Yorkshire and a confirmation. But then coming back the next day to receive communion in the school chapel with all my friends was, for me, the first step on the road to where I find myself now. And I'm not sure without that Eucharistic experience that I would be where I am now. So absolutely fundamental to my understanding of faith was this sense of pure invitation and a gathering. And I think I just wanted to have an early exploration with people. If you want to just unmute yourselves and behave sensibly, if you wanted to contribute something about your very, very first experience of the Eucharist, if you can remember it, if you weren't brought up in that tradition, you know, what was your very, very first experience of this invitation?
I can talk. I was confirmed when I was in my 30s, and my first confirmation, my first Eucharist after that was absolutely overpowering. I could just, it was as if I was there on my own with God. Nothing else was around me. It was just awe-inspiring, and it's never left me.
Great.
I grew up in the Presbyterian church, so it was rather different for me. Communion in the Presbyterian church only happens about 3 or 4 times a year, and it's very solemn. And we were prepared for your first communion in a certain way, and you had to stand before all the elders and explain why you wanted to do this, which was quite daunting when I was about 15.
It's a bit intimidating.
But I remember it as an awe-filled experience, I think. And for me, it's the most intimate part of the relationship that I have with God.
Thank you.
I think for me, I was a bit like Jackie. My mum said I couldn't receive until I'd been confirmed, and it was up to me to be confirmed. And I think I got confirmed in my early 40s. And it was being in the church with a crowd of people receiving for the very first time from Bishop Laurie, but having that whole feeling that it was just me and God in there on our own. And even now, you know, having the Eucharist, that for me is the key to my faith. And at the moment, not being able to have that, having spiritual communion, it's quite interesting.
It's really hard. It's really hard. I've confessed to my cathedral colleagues that I tune into their broadcast up until after they've preached, and then I simply can't bear it. I know there's all sorts of theology around receiving the Eucharist spiritually, but I have found it really, really tough. I don't know how other people feel about that, or if somebody else wants to chip in with a very early experience of the Eucharist.
Could I mention my earliest experience of taking the Eucharist?
Of course.
I was confirmed at around about the age of 21, shortly following my father's death.
Right.
And it came to mean an awful lot to me. In fact, it still does. It's where the whole of heaven and creation and God meets us. It's absolutely central to everything I believe. Yet the minister who trained me, I won't mention his name, he was in Southend. He asked me afterwards. Pardon?
Let's not name names.
No, I wasn't going to. He asked me afterwards how I felt about it, and I and I said it made me feel warm inside. It made me feel complete. And he said, well, that's rather I forget the exact words that he used, but he pretty much dismissed that. And that has remained with me ever since. And I think that at that time, that really was the response I had.
Yeah.
That you know, and I think we have to be careful when we interact with people.
Definitely.
Because it will remain with them, possibly for the rest of their days.
Mm.
So anyway, that was my first experience, but it was an absolutely marvellous and wonderful experience, and it still remains so.
Good, good. Anybody else want to contribute, or I'll move on to my second little thing.
Could I say? Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. And my first experience of Eucharist, I always know about it and go to church and always go up for a blessing. But my very first time of receiving the Holy Communion is the day that I got confirmed at St. George's in East Ham. And I got confirmed and I had to give a kind of testimony, and I'm not very good at public speaking. But I went up and I gave a testimony, and I don't know where the words came from. And it was just overwhelming. And having had the experience of the Eucharist and being confirmed at the same time, after the service was completed and we were leaving home, I did something unusual, which I cannot even recall that I did it. And it's only when I got ordained that someone pointed it out to me that, remember, I was there when you got confirmed. I walked with you through that journey and so monitor you and stuff like that. And she said, I was walking behind you coming out the church and this is what you did. However, what I can remember of that very day was that as soon as I was standing on the step of the church where they were taking photographs, I had this presence with me. This divine presence was standing beside me, dressed in the most finest white linen that I can ever remember. And that divine presence was walking with me for the remainder of the entire day. I came home, I was in the kitchen, I was cooking, and that presence was right there with me. Every time I turned to my left, that presence was standing there. And that was my most vivid memory of receiving the Eucharist and being confirmed at the same time. But what the lady said to me that happened on that day as I was coming down the aisle from out of the church before I got outside, she said there was a cross standing in front of me. And she said, I saw you looked on that cross. And she said, the passion that came out of you, that poured out of you, when you look at that cross, she said, I knew that you were going to go further in the church. She said, you wasn't just a member or a laity. She said, you was going to do, she said, She said, what I saw poured out of you was just too much. And I never realized that I even did that. It's only on the day of ordination that she reminded me.
But these are profound experiences, aren't they? And I think as priests, it's worth keeping that sense of the profound experience in how we're presenting this to other people. So I am going to move on a little bit, but we can come back to that. So there were some questions earlier about, you know, what are you doing when you're presiding at the Eucharist? And for me, it's always been that I am recalling Christ's invitation. And so as in whatever way I'm preparing, in whatever I'm doing, it feels like I am reminding people of Christ's invitation to share a table together. And I have sent you just a little email with some text from a book by Paul Bayes. So what do I mean by this invitation to a table? And this comes closest to the description. So again, I'll read it to you. The table by Paul Bayes. At the table, you sit close beside the poor carpenter Jesus, who has invited you and made room for you there. You are very close, you and he, sitting side by side and gazing in the same direction. If he were more distant from you, then you might turn and see him. But he is close to you, closer to you than you think, closer indeed than you are to yourself. So you can turn as quickly as you like, but you cannot see him with the eyes of your body. Since the day of his ascension, no one ever has. And yet we, even you, even I, can be sitting right beside him at the table because he has invited us and made room for us there. Of course, we do not have to sit there. There is a choice in sitting, and there is a choice in looking. As we sit there, we may choose to look in the same direction that the poor carpenter looks. Indeed, our growth in holiness is just that, a growth in seeing things as he sees, a development in our looking, a sharpness in our attention. If we choose to look his way, then, for example, we will see the needy and be drawn to meet their need. We will see the beauty of the earth and be drawn to sustain it. We will see those who sit opposite us at the table and be drawn to speak truth to them and to love them as they really are. Sitting and looking and acting. That is what it is to be a believer. That's the best text I think I've ever found that describes something for me of the experience of being at the altar, inviting people to the table. And I think it's the one bit of ministry that I have never, ever felt nervous about. Everything else, yes. Talking to people, I'm not the world's most confident person, but there's something about that table and invitation and the sense of you share the table with Christ, you're continuing that invitation. It's meant that wherever I have celebrated the Eucharist, and as a member of cathedral staff, you get sent to some very peculiar places to cover, I've never felt nervous. I'm nervous with all sorts of people in all sorts of situations. But there's something of the confidence in that table and what you're doing that means that I've never ever felt nervous celebrating the Eucharist. So again, I just wondered, I did have a moment of almost wanting to burst out laughing. My very, very first Eucharist at All Saints Springfield, I was feeling particularly poised and particularly holy. And it was kind of like the pinnacle of what I'd been looking forward to. And as I was concentrating on what was in front of me, and some friends had gathered, this tiny little spider started crawling around the altar cloth. And I just thought, God, you've got such a brilliant sense of humour, because my normal reaction would have just been to squish the thing. But I thought, I can't kill one of God's creatures. anxious in the middle of celebrating the Eucharist because it would completely wreck my sense of poise and holiness. So there is some humour in there when you're celebrating, but I just wondered, for you as people who are having to wait a little longer to do that, what do you imagine it will feel like when you're the person saying the words that invite people to this table again and again? What do you imagine that is going to feel like?
Weird.
Say a little bit more if you wouldn't mind.
No, that's the one thought. Weird.
That's the one thought. Is that
Beginning
Beth?
to get into the thought process, well, that's going to be really weird.
I can't see. Oh, it's Beth. I can't see you on screen unless I switch.
I feel like you should have known that was me.
What do you mean weird?
I think it's just going to be very peculiar. I watched a lot of people do it for a long time, and I think it will be very peculiar when it's me. And I think possibly for everyone watching, I'll be like, what is happening? So yeah, I think it'll just be very, very peculiar. I think it'll be an alien sensation.
Sure.
I think there's a certain amount of fear and nervousness. You want it to be right because you're doing it for everybody else. I mean, I often feel, and I ask you, as a priest, how does it feel to preside for others? And at what point do you feel you're present in the presence? And how do you communicate that? And how do you, I don't know, almost limit that so that you can serve everybody else?
It kind of changes through the service. There's, and it depends where you are, how familiar is the place, I think. So you are always present to it. But there's also a sense that, you know, what could possibly go wrong? You know, I've had all sorts of peculiar things go wrong. I sent chalices flying across the altar, but, you know, there isn't really anything that can go wrong. And if you drop something, then, well, you're just a human being and people will forgive you. I don't think there's any fear to be had about it. And if you get the words wrong, you stop and you repeat the words correctly. They're really, it's a joyful thing. It's an absolutely joyful thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think there should be any fear around it.
I took your question when you said, Kate, about how do you feel about doing the Eucharist for others again and again. I think I went with that. I did a different journey with that in my mind of thinking, what does it, I suppose I was thinking, what would it mean to do it again and again, as in, does it lose its meaning, become more important? And I suppose I was just thinking in my mind, my response to that, the way I took the question was, I suppose it makes me interested. There are some things in like this kind of, or I suppose in any kind of ministry, secular or in church or whatever, where there are things that I kind of get bored doing. And I don't mean this with any disrespect to communal, but there are things I've done again and again, and sometimes it's hard to find the meaning and I'm just doing it. But I was just thinking, I was thinking with a meal, there's something quite interesting of like, we feed ourselves all the time, don't we? And there's both a mundane in it and also a special. And I think communion, maybe I would be thinking, you know, if I'm doing it again and again, I know it's probably not what you meant in the question, but it's how I took it, of thinking, actually, I almost want to be able to
I think there is
know the joy and also recognise the beauty of God in the mundane. It's an amazing meal, and it is just a meal. I'm thinking that's quite profound too.
It kind of changes over time. So there are some Eucharists that I remember more than others. But if you're doing it week by week by week, there's nothing about it that becomes mundane, because it has its own sense of sacred. But one of the things that I always do to stop it becoming, I mean, it's made of ordinary stuff. It's made of ordinary people, made of the fundamentals of bread and wine. It's made of some very ordinary everyday stuff. But I always put in a pause at the end of the Eucharistic prayer before I launch into the Lord's Prayer, because I want to just gather my thoughts. It's partly because I'm mildly asthmatic and I've run out of breath by then. But I always have that as a gathering point for me personally, so that I can recollect what have I just done, and I've got the chalices and sometimes hundreds of them in front of me. Or if I'm in a little church, I'm looking at something profoundly different, but that's my moment of recollection in the service. You know, what am I doing? Because you can do that as the presiding priest, so long as nobody interrupts you. You know, you can put in those moments of recollection. So even if you've done it, you know, week after week without a break, you're making sure that there's an opportunity for yourself to connect with it.
Yeah, I was just thinking of even in sharing communion, home communions I've done before, like 3 in a row, like an hour. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for it to become a Monday. Like actually, a beautiful thing of the provision of daily bread. It's like, yes, thank you, Lord, that we share a meal, and it's special because it's so ordinary. So I don't know. That to me sounds home. And all of life, which I like. Maybe different from people's views. I don't know.
Anybody else want to?
Sorry, I was going to say I'm really excited at the thought of being able to preside soon.
Good.
I mean, it can be described sometimes, can't it, as celebrating the Eucharist.
Yes.
And I've done, you know, years probably of helping to distribute communion and home communions, and I can't wait. I'm frustrated that it's been put off. But what's going through my mind also is I have this anticipation, this excitement, and perhaps a bit like Lizelle is saying, you know, I hope and pray that it won't ever become, you know, a mundane sort of act. I think these words from Paul Bayes are just beautiful. So yes, I'm excited.
I don't think I've ever found it mundane. I've sometimes, you know, not been in the best of moods, if I'm tired, if parents have had a go at me at school, which happens on a regular basis. But it's kind of, you know, I don't, because each occasion is slightly different, and there's something about your own preparation as well, and a bit of self-discipline about your preparation for that particular cold, wet February morning.
I think my problem on my first communion, Eucharist, will be not crying too much. I'm a blubber and I will cry. They all know I will cry, so I will have to try and contain myself.
Yeah. I think that I don't think I've ever cried presiding. I've certainly shed a few tears very occasionally when preaching and it's got a little bit too close, but I think it's an invitation to other people as well to be human, to laugh and cry and have all of those emotions. I mean, you do have to have an element of self-control and self-discipline because you're doing something for other people. But yeah, I think just enjoy a great moment when it comes.
Having a background as a Salvationist, I've obviously been on a bit of a journey learning and coming to love the communion service and the Eucharist. And what was really helpful for me, there was a very elderly lady at a very traditional style of church and service, and she just started to talk to me about what it meant for her taking communion. And she said, and I shall never forget her words, when I approach the altar rail, I come to the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
And actually, that's it really, isn't it? In a nutshell for me, it doesn't go further than that. That is exactly as you were saying, the invitation, that's where she receives. And actually for her, she was at the foot of the cross. And that's been probably the most powerful thing that's ever been said to me. She wouldn't have known it on my journey from Salvationism to C of E.
I like the thought that one day I might be able to preside over communion and it to be part of a whole feast for people that actually don't have any food. I love the thought that I could share a banquet with, like, feed people, and in the role that God's called me into in the church to speak Jesus without thinking, am I doing I love that thought. Maybe one day that will happen.
It sounds like you're describing the heavenly banquet.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that one time. That'll be good.
So I just have a look with you. We'll go back on anything if there's time at the end, but just my kind of final thought. On the sheet that I sent you, there are 4 pictures. And each of these pictures is a little bit of a story. So the first picture, this is the chapel at Mucknell Abbey in Worcester, a Benedictine community that I've been popping in and out of and spending time resting in for, I don't know, at least 20 years now. And when I was ordained deacon at Springfield, one of the things that slightly worried me was when the wonderful priests there presided, they didn't use any actions. There were no gestures. That it was the words, and that was fine. But I spoke to my training incumbent and said, actually, I really want to use actions. I want to use my hands to point towards what I'm talking about. And his response was basically to say to me, Kate, we'll do what you like. You're the president at the Eucharist. How you preside is entirely up to you. So that that was a very generous invitation to me. So what I did was I got in touch with the abbot at Mucknell, who has become a great friend over the years. And we arranged a weekend where I would go and spend the weekend with him. And where the very, very bright light is shining in the corner of the photograph, behind there is the vestry. And we basically spent the weekend playing Eucharist in the vestry. So he taught me his actions, because I'd always thought his actions were gentle and unobtrusive. And we basically practiced going through those actions, because to me some of those actions are important, because it then ceases to feel like people are watching me. They're looking at what I'm talking about on the table, and I'm using my body to point towards them. And about 10 years later, when he was away, when I was there, one of the community invited me to preside in their chapel. And it was a wonderful bit of closing the circle to find myself in that particular chapel, then doing those actions. But it was a good lesson in be confident about what you want to do. I mean, obviously you're guided by your training incumbents, but the person I worked with was very generous and just said, Kate, you've got to be comfortable behind the altar. It's up to you. So that's the first picture. The second picture is that was my church at All Saints Springfield, where every Sunday I would either preside at 8 o'clock or preside at 10:30. And it was great. I had a brilliant 3 years, and my confidence grew, and I loved being there. And over time, I was trying to describe this as something. It's a little bit of a clumsy comparison, but it's a little bit like learning to drive a car. You just get on and do it. You don't think about what you're doing. You know what the clutches do. You know where the brakes are. And you kind of, once you've got your comfortable actions, they become your comfortable actions wherever you are, because you're doing it week by week by week. It then ceases to be a big thing. It's just how you preside at the Eucharist becomes how you do it. And then just the two pictures at the bottom. So these are two pictures from Chelmsford Cathedral. The one on the right is the view on a Sunday morning, looking out on this vast space. There's a big gap between you and where the first person is sitting. The big advantage there, though, is on your right-hand side. If you drop anything, there's an army of vergers that will sort you out. And somebody else sorts out your microphone, your order of service. I got caught out, I think, on my first mission out to another church that needed a member of clergy. There were no vergers. I was supposed to sort out my own microphone and find my own stuff. I realised how spoiled I'd been. And then the picture on the left of that, that's the little chapel. That's St Sed's Chapel at the back of the cathedral. And in both of those places, I used the same actions. And the only difference being probably in the big space, the actions are bigger. Because I'm aware that people are much, much further away. So there's nothing theological going on. I'm probably just doing this, whereas in the little chapel, I may be doing this. So there's something for me about inhabiting the space that you're given, and becoming confident in who you are as the presiding minister, because you will probably, like me, end up presiding in all sorts of places, some vast, and your microphone's up with an army of people helping you. And then some of them will be tiny little places where I arrived one day and I asked, where was the stuff to go on the altar, and somebody said to me, well, it's in the safe, but they don't know where the key is. But you've kind of got to become, there's a self-confidence that I think you develop in inhabiting that space as the presiding minister, whatever that space ends up looking like. And any comments from people? I think we've just got a couple of minutes left if anybody wants to ask anything.
I'd just like to say I was actually confirmed at All Saints Springfield.
Oh, lovely.
That's where the magic happened.
Brilliant. Well, I just remember it was a lovely day, my very first time of presiding. I think I did an 8 o'clock service, but using common worship. And then a whole group of us went out for breakfast together.
My children were baptised at All Saints. It's got a special place in my heart too.
It's a really good parish church. But you have to work out where the steps are. There's some very awkward steps for you to go flying. Any questions from anybody?
I'd also just say that if you haven't read The Table, it's a brilliant book to read. Yeah. I mean, it's just a wonderful book. And he talks about the table stretching down the road and everyone gathering around it. It's fabulous.
Well, it's a bit like, I can't remember who it was who was just speaking on screen, said about inviting everybody, the hungry, the homeless. I think that's a great vision to have in mind. So those are my reflections on presiding at the Eucharist, and I hope you have a truly joyful occasion when it's eventually your turn to do it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the only thing I'd say is, if it isn't a brilliant experience the first time you preside,
well, if you drop something. No, there'll be plenty of other times.
And God has exactly the right time to give you the special experience. first time I presided at the Eucharist, actually it wasn't wonderful, and there wasn't a spider to remind me of whatever the spider reminded you of, Kate, or
it just reminds me that I couldn't,
at least.
It reminded me of my very, very poor concentration.
Well, fair enough. But no, see what I mean? If we put all of our hopes on, oh, the first time I preside, it'll be a wonderful experience. And if it's not, then we feel disillusioned and disappointed. Actually, we need to trust God that at the right time, along with your presiding at the Eucharist, and if it's the 5th time or the 6th time, that's okay. There will be a point where you feel like you've come home and it's right and it fits you, or rather you fit it. Don't rush it. Let God. It's God that's the one that will give the experience at the right time for you. And we just need to be in the right place and be open and keep going, don't we?
And also kind of trust the people around you, because there will be servers and there will be other ministers. I hope Beth doesn't mind me telling a little story about her dad. Is that all right, Beth? I can't see you, but can you tell me that you're still there? So I arrived at the cathedral really a little bit unprepared for the size of presiding there. But it was Beth's dad that walked me through it. And then he had this wonderful habit of, if you were about to head the wrong way, he'd cough. And he'd mutter under his breath, "Go left." Which came in very, very handy the first time I presided.
I think muttering is very generous of you, Kate. Outright hissing.
Well, I kept telling him in the weeks leading up to it, and I said to him, "Simon, I've never presided with incense. I'm presuming you're going to show me." And on the Sunday that I was presiding, in this very big place in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, 10 minutes before the service we walked it through, but it was kind of saved by the fact that I knew how to interpret the muttering and the coughing as I proceeded to go around the altar in the wrong way at one point. But it was, people will be there to support you. They won't be waiting for you to fall over and make an idiot of yourself. There will be, people do support you very generously.
Kate, thank you so much. And we're going to take a break now and come back at the top of the hour. And Kate and David have agreed to answer our questions. So it would be no bad thing as we take a break and have a cup of tea or something to think through, what is the question I would like to ask today? Thank you.